Right now, I want to introduce Mike Burney and Sari Saarinen from Unifor. Mike is a national representative for Unifor. His responsibilities are negotiating collective agreements and resolving collective agreement grievances up to and including labor arbitration. In addition to being a service rep, Mike's responsibilities also include being a liaison between national union workplace and local union EFAP addiction reps. Part of Mike's role is breaking stigma tied to mental illness and addiction. Mike is a person in long-term recovery from addiction and relies on his life experience when assisting Unifor members. Sari is the National Health, Safety and Environment Director at Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union representing workers in all economic sectors, including transportation, manufacturing, and natural resources. Sari is responsible for protecting worker rights, promoting safe and sustainable work transformations, while ensuring the health and safety of workers. She has a passion for meeting people, learning their stories, and building relationships in support of lasting, meaningful work adaptations for workers today and tomorrow. Sari comes to the National Union from the airline division, which represents members from coast to coast to coast in Canada. So they're going to dialogue about their experience and how they approach and manage isn't the right word, but approach and continue to try and support and find solutions to the addiction and opioid harm reduction. So over to you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much. And hey, Mike, we're having a conversation, the two of us with a few friends on the screen from different parts of the province and maybe the world as well. But this is a conversation that we often have, and it is about breaking the silos in workplaces. What I found when I came into the department, as well as when I worked as a health and safety rep in my workplace, is that people were really married to the particular functions that they were either appointed to or elected to, and then the cross-pollination really didn't happen because our workplaces are microcosms of what happens in society at large. So we get lots of issues that we have to deal with, and each of us has that piece of the bigger puzzle that then we need to put together. And I've seen through health and safety lens, when I started out, I started out at Air Canada as a call center agent, and how some of the senior agents couldn't even lift a cup of coffee without the assistance of the other hand, because they had worn out their shoulders from ripping tickets. For those of you who remember still having paper tickets, that's what a human hand did all day long, 8 hours a day, is ripping those tickets and putting them together. So there was a lot of wear and tear and poor ergonomic setup in the workplace. And I saw these agents as they started their shift, painkillers, how they started. And then when I thought, oh, we can't have that, let's try some health and safety issue conversation with the employer, getting better equipment. It was like, don't rock the boat. And I'm thinking, what do you mean don't rock the boat? Like, you need to change in the workplace. And then in my other roles, I saw dismissals, firings because of what the employer would either consider theft of time or theft of property. And as you started building the case for the worker to bring them back to work, addictions were often part of the root cause of why the behavior or the action changed in the workplace. And that was, I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the skill sets to be able to do any of that kind of work. And so I relied on the union to be able to give me that skill set. And that's what you and I have been doing for the last few years, is building that awareness and knowledge base. And I love that primary prevention. That's the hat that our department wears continuously in the workplaces, building that primary prevention so an injury doesn't happen. But when that injury does happen, and unfortunately we see those almost on a daily, if not weekly basis, injuries that occur in the workplace, that continuum of prevention fails, where does that injured worker go? Is it some of them have long short-term benefits, compensation world, but we know the road of the injured worker is so lonely. And then returning to work. I find that the return to work in the workplaces and occupational health and safety don't always talk to each other. And then they start talking to each other when there is a problem instead of being part of the solution. And then I hear from workplaces of there's a well-known, accepted lockers where you can go and get Tylenol threes. You can get cocaine, where you can get alcohol to get through the shift, to get through the workday, whatever workplace you're at. And I get heart palpitations from that. So you and I have these conversations of how do we put all of these pieces of puzzle together. So I wanted to talk to you about enabling. I often hear about that. Well, you're enabling that those actions that are taking place in the workplace.
Yeah. Sari and I, we've had this conversation that we often start with a brief conversation about one thing and we get into the broader picture of it and how our jobs intertwine. And it's not just as an employee assistance rep, but it's also the union stewards and the local union presidents that are involved in this. Because you're right, a workplace is a community, and depending on the size of that workplace, it becomes quite a broad community. And you're right, in every community, addiction is everybody has a role in it, every part of that. And when we think about enabling, I think we have to, as a union, I think as a union rep, before I was a mental health advocate, I was writing grievances and defending employees. And I think we've crossed that line often about where is enabling, right? And of course, we're talking about addiction today. And when, so if someone is on opioids for pain and they follow the prescription and they heal and they're off the opioids and nothing bad happens, that's not an addiction, right? When does it become an addiction? And I think Dr. Fergal talked about that. And it's, when is there behavioral control issues and when are they trying to get off it? And that's often when the other people in our union get involved in it, right? So when behavior is becoming an issue due to an addiction and opioid use, often it's exacerbated and shows up through either attendance or interaction with fellow employees. And both as a union rep, a mental health advocate, and health and safety rep, often the other actors, right, come to us because they're concerned sometimes about their safety. And so then we're weighing this issue, right? Are we here to take care of the person who had the first injury, who's been medicating for it? And now when do those medications start doing more harm than good? And that's often where we get. And if we're not all talking, right? So we've often seen in workplaces, and we talked about this, where there's a behavioral issue from somebody and it gets to the union rep, the shift union rep, and there's a grievance put in because they were disciplined, they shouldn't have been disciplined. And that's when we get into what could be enabling. When we think about what is enabling for a union, and in a workplace, it's really no different than what is enabling in a family or in a community, right? It's the denial, it's justifying, it's playing the blame game, and this person didn't do anything wrong, they were just upset. And those are all things that often start sometimes in the regular grievance procedure because a union steward that doesn't know the whole picture, that doesn't know everything because we're not networking good enough, that's how those issues get dealt with. And it's often where I would start seeing the issue is the later stages of the unresolved grievances when they get to arbitration and we get to have an in-depth discussion with the employee. And, so often we could be enabling, and often, just like enabling, I think, in a family or in a community, it's feeling like we're doing the right thing out of love. But often what we may be doing is enabling that addiction, giving the person another reason. So
Yeah, thanks for that. Because I do see that in the workplaces as you start, and often it's that investigation. There's been an incident that has occurred in the workplace, and then you start peeling the layers of the onion, getting to the root cause so you can prevent that from happening again. And sometimes you find things that you just wish you hadn't found, that everyone knew what was going on, yet people look the other way, including employers. And that was the really sad part, is that employers knew that there was issues going, substance use issues going, but they chose to look the other way. And then the issues escalated in the workplace. But it's also, I think, over the years, as occupational health and safety has been evolving, that it's not just the physical safety in the workplace, but it's also the psychological, those psychosocial issues of ensuring that you have that safety in the workplace. And so that has grown. And how do we recognize that? And you and I often have this conversation, is that we bring to the table conversations about those psychosocial factors. And Dr. Fergal made mention of that control of work, that I'm just not a robot in the workplace. I'm a thinking individual. I have I contribute to the workplace. How well am I able to do those contributions? Have that control over the workplace. Having respectful workplace, that there is no violence, there is no behaviors like that in the workplace. That I'm viewed as being a partner in the workplace, if I can use that word, partner. And when those psychosocial issues are not being fulfilled, you don't feel that you are a value, that internal value as a human being, as a worker contributions. And I saw that firsthand once at a major employer in Ontario. And I happened to be on tour there, and with an international delegation from Italy, actually wanting to look at this particular workplace. And one of the operators came off the line and talked to the supervisor who was walking with us, saying, I've got this great idea. I think I've solved the problem. And he had a piece of paper that he then gave to the supervisor, and the supervisor looked at it, actually crunched it, threw it on the floor, and said to the person, get back on the floor. And this was a 6-foot guy, and I could see him, his shoulders were hunched as he went back on the line. Is he going to be putting 110%? That burden, and we've often talked about that, is that backpack, that burden of life gets heavier and heavier as those psychosocial issues are not being addressed in the workplace. And I have to say, this has been one of the most challenging conversations of even having with health and safety reps, is not only the physical safety, but that psychosocial, psychological safety in the workplace. And then when those are not being fulfilled, because that becomes to me a mental injury, how do you assist yourself in coping? And so it's those coping mechanisms as well. And often you hear people, I've had a rough day, I'm going to have a drink, I'm going to do this. It's those injuries that you may not have directly a physical body injury, but it's that mental injury. And so you and I talk about that, and I know you have your perspectives on that as well. So I'd like to share that with our friends.
yeah, so and you're right, those are all psychological injuries, right? And in the human body, often, and we can sometimes small psychological injuries we learn to deal with, we learn to live with. But as they get greater, then we call those psychological injuries, or as Dr. Fergal said, there's pain, psychological pain there. And what's great and terrible about opioids as painkillers, they work, right? So what we've seen in, although the original reason for someone maybe to go on a painkiller is for a physical injury, they also worked on the other injuries in our lives. And speaking as an addict, like we have injuries in our lives, and someone who's not an addict learns to deal with these issues. We have ups and downs at work, we have ups and downs at home, and we learn to deal with these things in often healthy ways, whether it's going for a walk, talking about our problems, journaling, going to the union office, filing a grievance. But the opioids don't distinguish from what injury they are the pain for. And so when those things happen, all of a sudden, the opioids not, they don't just make my shoulder feel better. All of a sudden, the injury of not feeling valuable at work, the anxiety of having to work for a supervisor I didn't like, or going into certain situations, depending on the type of job, all those things get masked. They don't disappear, right? And then what we found, right, is that when the physical injury starts to heal, all those people have quit dealing with the psychological injuries. And when they're then taken off the opioids for the physical injury, it's like they got used to carrying around these other burdens at work. And it's like you said, the backpack. And it's like someone took a block out of that backpack. And then when they were taken off the opioids, that cement block got put back in again. And they had, sometimes we lose that resilience to deal with things. And so now we have pain. We know that the pain, that part of the pain came back, the psychological pain. And we know that the opioids worked. And
I often
the other place to get the opioids aren't just our doctor, right? And that's, and there's still the street. And then obviously when people go to the street for painkillers, there's other issues that happen.
Yeah, and I often I like when you use the word resilience, and that's one of my I sigh here. Struggles in workplaces that the burden is placed on the individual. It's like you need to have organizational change, is recognizing that, yes, there's a role that each of us play in our workplaces, but the organization, those cultural changes as well, are not happening in tandem with what we're seeing occurring in the workplace. And yeah, there's the return to work piece in there as well, is culturally, how are you changing that return to work? And I know in one of our large work facilities, again, there's nimbleness in large work facilities, and I worry about our small to medium-sized workplaces. But in this large workplace, there were 200 people that were on long-term disability, have been out of the workplace, some of them over 10 years. And we, of course, know how difficult it is to come back to work after you've gone even for 3-4 months. And again, it's a joint effort. So the employer was there, the workers' compensation was there, WSIB in this case, the union was there, the return to work, all of those experts in the workplace, ergonomists were there, engineers were there to ensure that the return to work for that injured worker, they took into account what modifications needed to take place to be success, because it has to be a win-win for everyone. Out of those, I think it was 250, out of those 250, 200 were able to return to work. And that included 2 individuals that had the use of one arm only. And this is a huge manufacturing facility. So when there is a desire for that to happen from the side of the union, as well as from the side of employer, we can move mountains. And so how do you create that is, collective agreement. That's our roadmap that gives you the return to work. But I've yet to see any collective agreement language, even though we have model language on return to work, but it's still the parties, we want to have that, that flexibility ourselves to be able to do that. Have you come across return to work language?
Well, there's no perfect solution, right? But I think more than just the return to work language that works is it's finding avenues. Like so you started with resilience, right? And we think about resilience as that ability to kind of bounce back, right? So it's more than just, it's when somebody finds himself in a bad spot, how do they bounce back? Do they have access to a union steward? Is there, psychologically, is there a union office in that workplace where if someone that they have a safe place that they can go? Because again, and we know with the stigma around it, there's a stigma around being an injured worker. There's a stigma around addictions, right? And you start adding these stigmas up, and there's stigma over mental health. So it's really more about a collective agreement that allows a safe place for someone to work, a safe place for somebody to go when they don't feel safe, somebody they can trust, someone where they can talk, and it with anonymity, and to get, to get refocused. And I think it starts it starts at the collective bargaining table, and like in our collective agreements, it's not just the return to work language, but we'll often put in language, joint letters on mental health and addiction, and they don't have to be complicated letters, right? There needs to be an article or a letter in there that says mental health and addiction are part of life's issues. Employees will, right? At times, there'll be employees that will have substance use issues, and there will be mental health issues, and they are not the fault of the employee. And that's so important. It's as important as negotiating benefits and short-term disability. It's important for our members to read that at a ratification meeting and understand it is not the fault of the employee, right? These things happen. And I think that's the start.
That's great. And that's sort of the message, is that workplaces can make a difference in our lives. Our collective agreements, the content of our collective agreements, the evolution of our collective agreements do make a difference. And that's what we need to have, is that support in our working lives that then translates into our personal lives and our communities as well. So thanks for this opportunity. I look forward to hearing from the other panelists, and if there's any further discussions from our friends, the participants as well. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much to both of you. That was very insightful, and I'd be very interested to if the mental health and addiction clause or whatever is available. I'd be interested to see that language. I don't know if it is or not, but I think that sounds like a lot has been distilled from many years, I guess, of joint problem solving, as we talked about, and dialogue about these issues in your workplace. So I applaud that. Thanks.